Beesmas Simulator, a game of untapped potential. For years, it has been one of the most renowned incremental games on the Roblox platform. The experience provides unlimited opportunities for players. They could expand their hives to reach new goals, complete new quests to get more rewards, and an ever-expansive experience that can keep players hooked. Hidden beneath the wholesome aspects of the game lies many secrets, some buried away through time, now faintly being discovered yet again. At the end of the line, a singular figure emerges from the shadows. We're going to start at the very top of the iceberg, and I want to begin this discussion with the red bee glitch. The red bee glitch is simply a well-known visual bug that makes a hive slot appear red. My first personal instance of encountering this glitch dates back to as early as December of 2019. This was just before mutations released and May didn't know the true cause of why the slots would appear red. When we had leaks drops about the mutations, we would default to the idea that this was somehow linked to a bee being mutated or radioactive. However, this was not the case. To get this glitch, all you had to do was drag something that didn't provide the bee with bond onto the slot and you'd see the bee's hive slot turn red. The cog on the top of the star hole is a very unique decoration, and when you first see it you might be wondering what it's for. This cog is a reference to the cog code, which would give you 5 tickets. It is also very likely this could have been foreshadowing the eventual arrival of the Robo-Bear challenge. There are 2 bosses in Beeswarm that are quite well known, these being the Tunnel Bear and the King Beetle. Originally, the King Beetle guaranteed an amulet when you killed it, but this changed to a 1 out of 7 chance later on. These bosses both have their own unique stories that we can discuss further down the iceberg. In the game there are 2 headquarters, a red HQ and a blue HQ, both of these representing their respective colors with an NPC, a leaderboard, and a shop. White, however, only has a 35B zone where you can purchase the petal-themed gears and the gummy layer. But what if I were to tell you that a white HQ was meant to be in the game? This is an old message from 2018 where onett referenced the white HQ after being asked about it. Notice that he also mentions a second map. We'll come back to that later. I was able to locate a stream of leaks posted onto the Beeswarm Wikipedia in 2019. Many of these are already in the game, however there are a few that catch the eye. Robohoppers would have been alluding to the real-life grasshopper, and most likely would have been implemented into the Robo-Bear challenge. The only thing that I'm curious about is the Robo-Bear challenge came out in 2022 after intense testing, and looking through these leaks there are no other references to the actual Robo-Bear challenge. This leads to many questions. Was the Robohopper going to be a standalone mob? Where would it have been located? There is also Goo Ghosts. I found concept of it on a fan page but nothing official. This mob would have been a very interesting encounter to say the least. It strays away from the bug and animals logic that we're so used to. Another code is 38217 that refers to the capacity in onett's backpack at the top of the hives. This was a code available starting on May 18th of 2018 and grants the player 5 tickets. It is very well known that we have completely skipped Beesmas of 2023, but there are still accounts out there with snowflakes in their hotbars from previous Beesmas years. Snowflakes, unlike gingerbread, usually quote-unquote melt away, but if you keep these items in your hotbar without dragging them anywhere else, you prevent these snowflakes from melting. It's pretty weird to think about, but it's just a simple trick for those who want to get a head start on Beesmas, if there is one. In the game there are 3 different colored flowers, these being white, red, and blue flowers. However, there was an original 4th flower type, which was the yellow flower. This idea was probably scrapped during development. In Beeswarm Simulator, we exist within the confines of our map, comfortably hanging around in a state of familiarity. These inner spaces of our map are what we consider to be the normal. When we stray away from the concept of the normal, we enter a state of abnormality, of mystery. This is the essence of the void, an area below the entire map completely segregated and being its own entity. There are many takes on what this void could be. It could simply just be a workspace for the developer, a base plate. It could be a message, something that lurks beyond our understanding. The piece of music that plays in the honey void is titled Hibernation. Hibernation is defined as a state of minimal activity and metabolic depression undergone by some animal species. For example, a proper hibernation can be undergone by the most prominent animals in the game, this being the bears. However, do our bears ever undergo a proper hibernation? The answer to this is no. As the Void has its own music piece, almost like a disoriented version of Wax on the main map, it was definitely meant to have some type of message. Are we perhaps peering into the mind of Onett, an endless space with small pieces scattered throughout? Does this perhaps show the end of the line for the game? This is ultimately left up to the player to decipher. Now we return to the norm. Feels weird, doesn't it? In the community, two famous memes have spawned out of the game, some even taking on renditions outside the confines of the community, without knowledge of its originator. This is the honeyface meme and the get stick bugged meme. The honeybee took its roots due to the nature of the bee's face instantly becoming a fan favorite. Due to the nature of this aesthetic, it was able to manifest into its own pop culture, along with the stickbug meme. The stickbug meme originated from stickbug in Is Normality and took off with the release of the Get Stickbug the LOL by Stackman on July 24th of 2020. It is consistently used in bait and switch type videos similar to a Rickroll. Another meme spawning out was the blue backpackers meme, but of course this one stayed relatively confined within the community. Blue backpackers have ultimately become a negative stereotype due to repeated behavior of stealing loot from sprouts or begging later game players for favors. At the root of this behavior was always the blue backpack. I'm going to cover another feature that never made it into the game. This is the Crimbalt bee. It was an actual bee that was meant to be released as a fusion of the superhero duo, this being the Crimson and the Cobalt. However, it never fully made it into the game, despite having actual appearances in test servers. This would have been a historic bee, being the first ever mixed type bee, which would benefit two colors at once. In the very early days of Bee Swarm, there were two mobs that were meant to be in place of the current Mantis and the Werewolf, these being the Crickets and the Yeti. The Yeti unfortunately was a test monster and a free model, so it's very unlikely that we'll see it in the game. I want to top this layer off by discussing pre-nerfed Festive Beans. Pre-nerfed Festive Beans have a very special place in my heart, particularly due to the fact that they were shareable in this era. You would be able to share their effects with friends and for a longer period of time, creating a near infinite source of pure honey on Honey Day. This quickly had to be nerfed due to the fact that players would buy these Festive Beans on alts and almost literally break the game. This will be a shorter layer, but we'll still cover some intriguing topics. One of the scary encounters in Beeswarm that I've had was the cave monsters. These monsters usually attack in pairs and are located inside the werewolf's cave. They also make a very interesting whispering noise. They are pretty much identical to spiders, except they lack eyes. There's also some lore provided by Onett regarding these mobs. Most of this information was probably stated as a joke, but it's still interesting enough to keep in mind. Never once was the cave monster ever required to be killed for a quest. Even king beetles and tunnel bears were required for beesmas quests at some point of time, but not the cave monsters. There are 4 fruits in Beeswarm, these being blueberries, strawberries, sunflower seeds, and pineapples. However, 3 out of the 4 fruits actually have respective dedicated fields for these fruits. The only one that doesn't is blueberry. The blueberry field was meant to be a field in place of blue flower, however Onett didn't have the necessary models to create such a field. The concept of a blueberry field still exists out there. Now I want to go back to cover King Beetle's lair. There's a text message on the floor of his lair titled Song Name. This is yet again a reference to another code. The code is Crawlers. Crawlers is a song that plays in both Tunnel Bear and King Beetle's lair. The song is quite sinister compared to the others, and the title name does speak for itself. One of the most mysterious figures in Beeswarm Simulator, seemingly stuck under the 30B zone, with no clear intentions. The shadow bear is unlike any other NPC in the game. You can't interact with it. It doesn't necessarily go out of its way to attack you. Whether or not this is due to its circumstances of being seemingly trapped is unknown. It merely stands with no goal in sight. It is also very possible that this is the bear that is referenced in Black Bear's dialogue. These would be superhuman feats for any bear. Here's a message from 2018 where onett jokingly taunts players, possibly referencing the true power of this bear. The most likely scenario of a shadow bear return is related to another big mystery that will be covered later down the iceberg. Now I want to quickly cover an ornament which was a 1983 Memory Match Championship ornament, which is an ornament awarded by Spirit Bear upon completion of her beesmas quest. This solidifies Spirit Bear as one of, if not the oldest bears in the game. In 2019 there was also a giant Crimball bee model in the game. You can use the vicious and windy bee models as reference for how large this model was compared to a normal bee. Theories have sprung out that this actually could have been an NPC, like Riley or Bucko, which are slightly larger than your own bees. Cursed images are a great representation of the community's humor. However, these images are just as equally unsettling. Here are a couple of examples that I've gathered for you. Going back to the theme in Layer 3 of familiarity, these are images that trick your imagination into seeing something in the game that you're already familiar with, but then with a completely different twist. Something as simple as the liquor bee having blood-red eyes completely changes the tone of this image. What sort of feelings do you get when you see this? You're not jumping for joy, I'll tell you that right now. Next, I want to talk about a game-breaking phenomenon popularized by Elol and many others at the same time. Around fall of 2020, a string of records was broken, all in a single day. These were the following records set by just one player. This was thanks to a deadly Supreme Star Amulet combination, but also the main catalyst being the Mythic Meteor Showers. Many of you may see the Mythic Meteors as simply a way to get some good loot, but at one point of time it was an absolute necessity to boost with these. Meteors were able to collect tons, and this scaled with the amount of Mythic Bees in a player's hive, and of course people like Elol had hives full of them. That is to say, onett immediately had to do an emergency nerf regarding these meteors, and they slowly faded out of the meta. In Beeswarm's earliest stages, bees had different faces. These give off a very different vibe compared to the current ones that we have now. Here are some of the ones I found. Honeybee especially is not the one we know today. The hive swapper was meant to be a feature that would allow players to swap slots, to perhaps allow their hives to be more effective or look the part at a much cheaper cost. I personally believe that this was going to arrive along with the sticker update, since the main theme was hive aesthetic. Unfortunately, the last time onett spoke about this feature was in late 2021, and there are currently no signs of it returning. Many of you have probably already heard of the Honey Hammer, the end-all be-all for the endgame collectors. The most information I received on this was the fact that it was going to cost 1,000 oils, which actually isn't that much by today's standards. The idea ended up being scrapped altogether as onett enjoyed the concept of a 3-color archetype for endgame rather than a singular path. However, it's very important to note that it is indeed in the game, and its usage can be seen if you look deep enough. Now I'm going to cover a more theoretical aspect of the game. From the very start of Beeswarm's history, there has always been discussion of the best bee in the game. Of course, at this current moment, it is the digital or the bear bee, whichever you prefer, but rumors had spread in 2018 about a possible god bee. Naturally, I became curious, so I tried to do some research. onett never mentioned anything about a god bee, nor has it ever been seriously listed on any reliable sites. The closest I could find was 2 thumbnails from the YouTuber That Guy referencing the god bee. However, in these videos he was discussing the photon bee or mainly showcasing fan-made models. Whether or not a god bee will ever make its way into the game will still be a mystery, but chances are there won't be one. So this is going to be another short layer just before we enter some of the more obscure topics. But there is one thing from this layer I'd still like to discuss. There are many fan games that pay tribute to what Beeswarm is, and they all have their own twists and turns. However, none have come close to Beekeepers, which was able to replicate the style of play pretty well. In fact, it gained so much popularity, onett himself addressed the issue regarding the game. Some drama occurred between onett and the developers of Beekeepers, and the game ended up being taken down at one point due to the copyright infringement. As of now, it seems to be back up again, and you can still explore the game for yourself. At one point in time, the honeybee meme had gotten so widespread that it ended up spawning a sort of cult following on Reddit. Most of these were harmless art, but they would all center around the honeybee, almost treating the bee as a transcendent entity to be worshipped. People became fanatically obsessed with the bee, spawning tons of creations and some of them quite disturbing. One of the shot bears was killable at one point in past updates. This was most likely during the time when mobs had health bars similar to players rather than the standard health bars we know today. This bear was the top bear. It was achievable by having a rogue vicious bee at mountaintop to damage or kill the bear. The bear was granted infinite health later on. These next two entities I'm going to cover existed only in the test realm. One is a quest-giving bee. It was suspended on a blue platform above the daily leaderboard, and it provided on record one of the hardest quests to exist in the game. It was known to be double the difficulty of the 2019 Bumblebee Man quest. The rewards, however, were utterly insane. Also included in the test realm was Onett's secret field. This was located in the Honey Void. It was a square-shaped mixed field with all max tier flowers. Looking at the patterns, it actually seems that this is one of, if not the only field with an equal amount of each flower color. Unfortunately, this field only stayed in the test realm and never made it to the actual game. As of May 2024, every amulet with tiers has a supreme version, even the latest Cog amulet. The Stickbug amulet only goes up to Diamond. The last time Onett spoke of this amulet was in 2019, where he would add it after the Stickbug was to be reworked and the boards reset. Technically, all battle boards have been reset, but I'm not sure about the Stickbug rework. More details on this amulet are still unknown, but we can still hope for its return in the future. The lid. One of the greatest mysteries to exist in Beeswarm Simulator, and something that has become almost forgotten, rotting away in a player's memories. What started off as a serious attempt to implement a new concept into the game has slowly faded away into a metaphor. There are many different takes on the lid, some contradicting ones by Onett himself. Some of these are presented as jokes, others being possibly more serious. Even on beesmas, the lid takes on a biblical meaning, with the lid art referencing the birth of Christ. Ultimately, the lid has become Onett's own lack of initiative, representing his own workflow, and how it's become temporarily stuck due to his own inaction. But this doesn't prevent the lid from being opened, eventually. Some theories have even sprung out that we've already discovered what's under the lid in the game itself. The essence of a lid is its inability to be accessed from both the inside and the outside, something that at this point in time and for the foreseeable future can never be opened. Onett gave us the original comparison, this being his own inaction. I believe Onett's work on the lid can make or break the game in this sense. It will reveal a true endgame, either we go in or something else comes out. As I mentioned earlier, there's already plenty of theories regarding what's beneath the lid. When you look directly under the platform where the lid is located, what do you see? Covered earlier in Layer 5, this entity is a prominent figure due to its location directly under the lid, and it seemingly being trapped in its spot. This is one of the entities that many predicted would come out of the lid, if something were to come out. Finally, I want to pose a question to you. If you were ever creating theories for the lid, what were those theories? I believe it may bring us some sense of nostalgia, a false sense of familiarity, and we may believe we've already witnessed what is contained within, but we truly haven't understood the gravity of what that thing is, or will be. So of course there's much more to discuss regarding the lid, but it's best to leave that to your imagination. After all, nothing stated has been proven to be fact, and it's all theoretical. There is a Beeswarm Simulator sandbox game with over 1 million visits. I decided to see what it was like, and I was pleasantly surprised. It is a nearly one-to-one imitation of the main game along with many other additions. At the start of the game, you get to select a hive-colored team. You are also equipped with a honey hammer, and it makes a very unique sound when collecting from fields. It even has the old team leaderboards, originally from the old test realm back when Supreme Star emotes were being tested. The only downside was the game seems to be broken, probably due to the lack of updates. It has been about 2 years since the game has been updated, and you can see many features that are in the main game that aren't included in this version of the sandbox. Beeswarm Simulator was one of the 7 games that hosted the Ready Player 2 event that began on November 23rd of 2020 and ended on November to December of 2021. This was back when the digital bee was only an NPC and players inputted 7 different codes that came with different buffs to craft the strange goggles. After this, they would be able to interact with the computer and see the digital bee, which would lead them out to fields in order to solve puzzles. At the end of this event, players would be awarded the how to program basic accessory to wear on their avatar. To conclude this layer, I want to discuss a long forgotten leaderboard player who is right up there with Elol back in 2021. If you're a newer player, you may not have spotted him, and this is because he was leaderboard banned for abusing a windshine glitch. I don't know the exact details of this glitch, but sources I've read up on point towards some type of duplication glitch, but don't quote me on this. Arguments began to break out over how valid this ban was. Some would claim it was in Onett's right to ban a user from his own game. Others would defend Ty's actions, as Onett was technically at fault for not patching this earlier. Many other players who were apparently using this similar glitch weren't leaderboard banned, and Ty seemed to be the only outlier. The truth of this may not be fully understood. However, accusations without full evidence began circling like crazy, and players such as Elol were under massive fire and suspicion, even when there was a lack of evidence presented at the table. I do think there is an important lesson to take from this. Many of these things we learn from the community are mainly through word of mouth, and you should try your best to fact check your information and limit the spread of needless drama. Returning to an earlier community controversy was the SD Mittens controversy. SD Mittens is a legendary figure to many, right up there with many others due to her impressive consistency of being a top player, as well as her many accolades. She was the first player to reach the milestone of 50 bees, and had many personal interactions and congratulatory messages from Onett himself. However, this would also put her in the sights of many who would want to question this reputation. Sometime in 2019, players would spot her with a possible script in one of her videos. This would lead to a barrage of accusations. Again, this was only one instance of proof, and unlike Ty, Mittens never ended up being removed from the boards. It's very possible this could have been an isolated incident, hence the lack of a ban, or favoritism from Onett. However, this incident took place nearly 5 years ago, so nothing will be confirmed. Sometime in 2020, a new feature was added to the game that began to establish a sort of new economy in Beeswarm, with a supply and demand system, acting almost like a mini stock market. This feature was the Market Boost. The Market Boost provided different buffs at different prices, and the more purchases it had, the more expensive it would become. This would force many players to stop buying the expensive boosts and opt for cheaper options, therefore allowing the market to return to a balance. The issue, however, was the game worked in an exponential fashion. Endgame players are known to generate massive amounts of honey compared to the average player in one boost, so certain boosts would be monopolized in a way. In addition, an influx of hackers began to inflate certain boosts to the point where no players could purchase them. The 2021 beesmas update saw this feature removed, and the nectar storage ended up taking its place. Onett considered this a failed experiment. Okay, so one quick thing before we move on to this next layer. This next thing I'm about to cover wasn't included in the Iceberg by Pop Minute, but it is technically related to something that I mentioned earlier in the Iceberg that I skipped over. I'll talk about it more in depth at the end of the video if you're curious, but yeah. Beeswarm isn't exactly known for its horror aspect, but there are renditions and takes that are genuinely disturbing. This goes for beeswarmsimulator.exe, where Beeswarm is turned into a horror game. When you join the game, you're armed with a flashlight as well as a gun for some reason. The map is insanely dark and your visibility is limited. It's the complete opposite to the main game, where you can basically see in all directions. There's some very cursed imagery around the map, including the 10B zone shop where everything is just splattered with blood. Nearly all NPCs and gates have been redesigned, some of them really horrendously, with PNGs covering them, while others do look pretty disturbing. The game does seem to be content deleted at this current moment, so players can't visit it anymore. This is probably for the best, since the game isn't exactly what I describe as fun. Some aspects are poor, others are horrifying. Gates in Beeswarm are used to prevent players from entering zones that they're not supposed to be in. In the modern day, if you enter a zone that you haven't unlocked, the game automatically teleports you back to spawn. However, in the early stages of the game, these red barriers would straight up kill you instead. So players began to be crafty and they'd force reset their characters to obtain a force field and then utilize this to bypass gates. Many use this strategy to get past the 30B zone and proceed to glide underneath the platform to obtain the diamond egg that was in front of the shadow bear. This was a widespread strategy until the way the gates worked were changed. During the mutations update, a new sprout that was introduced to the game was being planted like crazy. This sprout was the debug sprout. It was black in color and provided neon berries, bitter berries, and atomic treats. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it can only be planted by onett, its spawn rate was 0%. Ever since the mutations update, sightings of the sprout have become extremely rare, and one being planted would symbolize onett taking initiative in his game once more. The spoiled jelly bean is a jelly bean that many don't even know existed. It is the most nefarious item, as it is the only jelly bean to give a debuff, and can occur out of left field. This is an extremely rare jelly bean that can essentially sabotage you mid-boost due to its beast speed debuff. One of the most memorable events for OG players was the 2018 Gummy Bear invasion, but the lore was just as dark. The entire questline was pretty much a front for you to help him expand his gummy empire and ended up taking over Beesworm. You could actually say he succeeded from a certain point of view, since white hives with gummy stars and gumdroppers pretty much dominate the game's honey making meta. A return of this event could easily revive the game, but that's all up to onett. Another one-to-one creation of the Beesworm map was by Swag MLG Joseph, which featured Beesworm as a game that could be nuked. Thanks he had covered this in a video on July 2020, and we got to witness a post-apocalyptic version of the Beesworm map. In 2019, Beesworm partook in the 2019 Roblox Egg Hunt event, and it introduced an event-exclusive item, this being plastic eggs. Plastic eggs were blue-colored eggs scattered throughout the map which forced players to go on scavenger hunts in order to retrieve them for Brown Bear's quest. The only purpose of this item was to complete the quest, so this item is no longer something that is obtainable. During the 2019 Egg Hunt event, players witnessed a mysterious figure in the blue maze near the ticket tent. This figure could not be interacted with, nor could a player do anything to it. Players had begun to find out that this figure was not only appearing in just Beesworm, but also other Roblox games. This mysterious figure was Eggwick, who has since vanished from all servers since September 28th of 2019. This figure, along with Bumblebee Man, are some of the only figures not meant to belong in Beesworm. His visit to the game is a big mystery till this day. The Purple Potion Bear, otherwise known as the Contest Bear, was a test realm only NPC that existed in 2020 to help with the Battle of the Hive colors. It offered the players a choice to join either the red, the blue, or the white Hive team. The 2020 contest was instrumental to helping onett balance out the Supreme Star Amulet and shape the game into what it is today. Along with onett's test field was a massive statue of onett towering over the void. The statue held the Honey Dipper with a portal hive and in some instances had no head. This statue has since been removed. I want to discuss this last point on layer 14. Is the game dying? The complete demise of Beesworm would be insane to see, considering how active and loyal of a player base it still retains even without an update. But there are many things that begin to point to an eventual downfall. The most obvious one is onett's lack of motivation, which seems to be diminishing over time. Eventually, a lack of content would lead to a total lack of incentive for any player to keep playing after a certain point. At the time of this video, even the official Beesworm server has been shut down for such a long time now. There is also a lack of communication or failure to communicate properly, and paired with the other issues such as toxicity, this puts Beesworm at great risk. As of now, we can say the macro is keeping the game alive and healthy, but it's unknown how many players may technically have quit on paper but are just purely macroing now. This is something I'd rather not worry about too much, but it very well may become relevant in the future if we continue down this path. Okay, so that was just the tip of the 14 layered iceberg by Pop Minute, and you can check it out for yourself in the description. And if it wasn't obvious to you already, I'm not particularly good at theory stuff, so a lot of theories are skipped over. I also couldn't cover every single item in the iceberg because I don't exactly know what everything is, so that's where you guys come in. I also did end up shifting a lot of things around, so like in layer 12, that was actually meant to be in layer 1, which is kind of crazy, since it's footage from the YouTuber That Guy, and he used to cover a lot of leaks and fan-made stuff. Since there probably are a ton of mistakes, you could feel free to correct me in the comments down below, or type out your own theories. You could even join the Discord if you want to provide me something more like in-depth or concrete. I'll gladly include it in a part 2 if I ever get around to it. Everything in this iceberg is pretty old considering it was made about 3 years ago, so it's really fair to say there's going to be quite a bit that no one knows without the original creators. So, Pop Minute, if you're out there, help a brother out. It's insane work what you did, and I know you made a couple icebergs for Critical HD back then, so I applaud your insane knowledge. And again, the link to the iceberg will be down in the description below.